Good evening and welcome to the San Mateo County Library's virtual Bookfest featuring authors Carole Bumpus, Mignon Dutt, Joan Gelfand, Audrey Kalman, and Geri Spieler. I'm Aileen Cassinetto, Poet Laureate of San Mateo County, and I'm delighted to co-host tonight's event with local author and former California Writers Club President Lisa Meltzer Penn. We have a full program for you tonight. Each author will be reading from their recent work, after which we will move on to the Q&A to be moderated by Lisa. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce Carole Bumpus. Having retired as a family therapist, Carole began a second career as a culinary travel writer. Out of her travels came her historical novel and companion cookbook, A Cup of Redemption and Recipes for Redemption. Searching for Family and Traditions at the French Table, Book 1 was published August 2019, and Book 2 was released a month ago. A third book, A Summer to Remember, Searching for Culinary Pleasures at the Italian Table, is due April 2021. She is a past president of the California Writers Club SF Peninsula branch and remains an active member on both the regional and state CWC boards. Please welcome Carole Bumpus.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me and for the wonderful applause I see, the virtual applause. I'm going to be reading just a small excerpt from this latest book, which is called, well, you can see it. It's blue rimmed. You can see it in the background here on the poster. And this was a part where I am in Brittany and we're traveling. I'm with my dear friend Josiane, and we're visiting her friend Micheline in Brittany. So I will start with that. After hiking up and down the crooked streets of Van all morning, we were famished. Back at Micheline's home in Damgan, she prepared an elaborate lunch, champagne and shucked oysters, followed by fresh sole, new potatoes, and asparagus. Josiane, Micheline, and I lazily savored the briny but succulent flavors of the Breton land and sea as we drank more and more wine and whiled away the rest of the afternoon. During one of those languorous moments, I asked Micheline to tell me about her summers in Damgan as a child. She poured 3 more glasses of wine from a second bottle, and we adjourned to the living room, where we settled into the comfort of her sofa. She began slowly at first, tipping her head back against the comfort of her sofa. Her blonde hair spreading around her flushed face, and soon vivid and animated memories began to flow almost as easily as the wine. I remember taking the night train from Paris with my parents in Van. We would arrive in Van early in the morning and take a bus to the very small village of Damgan, where my paternal grandparents lived. We were so tired and sometimes had to wait a long time for the bus. When it finally arrived, it was like seeing an old friend. It was this very old green bus that picked up vacationers at the train station and was always heavily loaded down with people and valises and chairs, bicycles, lounge chairs for the beach, wicker chests. They were all toppled on top of the bus and strapped down. I had come to spend the summer with my grandmother, which I did from the time I was 7 or 8 until I was 15. Yes, Josiane interrupted. I remember waiting for you to return to Penn in the fall, Micheline. A wistful smile spread across Josiane's equally flushed face. I too looked forward to that, Micheline sighed. Anyway, my parents and I remained on the bus until the very end of the line, which was here in Damgan. It would take perhaps an hour before we arrived, which was a very long time for me. We would get off the bus in front of a little cafe in downtown Damgan, unload our luggage and treasures. It was like a great party because many people were there to meet their families and friends, and indeed my grandmother always came to greet us wearing her traditional long black dress and white coif. She would be pushing a wheelbarrow like everyone else to carry all the suitcases and from the bus. Back then, Damgan was a little village of 300 people. There were many farms in the area, and I do remember the smell of the farms was sometimes kind of strong, especially in the summer heat. But no matter, because this was a community by the sea, many people came to spend their vacations in a little seaside cottage. We would arrive at my grandmother's house, an old house with a very big yard. And the first thing we would do was to put on our summer clothes. And I remember everyone wore the same type of shoes, espadrilles made of hemp. I was crazy with joy to be there. I loved the carefree summers, 3 full months where I could run and play with friends whom I had not seen since the summer before. At that time, people came to Dumgum by train and bus, but now everyone makes the trip by car, so those wonderful old days are gone. I remember my parents bringing me to my grandmother's house, but then they returned to work in Paris. But they traveled to Damgan on weekends and also spent their vacation months of August with us. She took a sip of wine. My grandmother lived in the same house her great-grandparents had lived in, and it was one of the few stable places I knew as a child. And like me, other children would arrive to spend summers with their grandparents. They came from Paris. Well, they came from all over France, she said, throwing her hands in the air. And we would always meet at the very same place every summer, under the eaves of a little cottage by the sea. She sighed and took another long sip of wine. After pulling on our summer espadrilles, the next first activity was summer was to get the bicycles in order. And then we would gallivant all around on our bicycles, going everywhere, down the little paths, up the little streets. We were free to go everywhere, and everyone was on a bicycle, as there were not many cars back then. Of course, we spent a great deal of time on the beach. In fact, every afternoon, at least until 7 o'clock in the evening, we spent our time fishing among the rocks. We would fish for pleasure, but also for food. We took great pride in that. And some of my most special memories are going fishing with my father. We would fish for shrimps with a habano, which is a net used to catch the little shrimps. What did this net look like? I asked. Micheline jumped up and grabbed a small piece of paper. Puffing her lips in and out as she worked, she carefully sketched the net, indicating a contoured net with a long handle. Josiane leaned over and offered some help on the matter, then got up and refilled our glasses. At that point, I was grateful that I was recording the conversation, as I could barely see my pen and paper. The wine had blurred my vision. It had also wrapped us in an envelope of heat. Josiane must have had the same feeling as she walked to the sliding glass door and opened it to let in the cool air. Okay, here it is, Micheline said. She held up the picture and explained how her father wielded the net to catch the shrimp. It reminded me of a net my great uncle had made to catch catfish. My father would also fish with a harpoon, Micheline continued. He would look around the rocks and eventually find the conger eel. They were about 2 meters long and very difficult to catch, but because he was raised there, he knew all the best tricks. I thought he was wonderful, and I was so proud of him. She leaned over and turned on a lamp. Her eyes were glistening with the telling. We children would stand in the water when we fished with our fathers and gather the mussels and oysters. The crabs were also easy to catch. We would lift the seaweed and with a special hook, wiggle it all about and shuffle the whole thing. The crabs would venture out and we would catch them. There were some places, special fishing holes, that were better than others. We used special crab pots that were barrel-shaped where the crabs would go in but could not get out. Oh my, it was such great sport. She clapped her hands as if she were that gleeful child again. When we took the fish home, my grandmother would make soup, especially a matelote, which is a fish soup made with conger eel. But this soup is loaded with bones, very, very fine bones. It was difficult to eat it without straining it through your teeth. She gritted her teeth to indicate what they did and inhaled with a shlish sound. Did you learn to make your grandmother's fish soup, this matelote? Nope, it's too much trouble, but I do enjoy making her coterade, a Breton fish stew which has a great deal of seafood. That's it.
Thank you so much, Carole. That was so yummy and rich and layered. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next reader is Migs Bravo Dutt, an Atlanta-based writer and researcher whose work has been published in several countries, regions, and cultures. Her short fiction has appeared in 22 New Asian Short Stories 2016 and Kitab's The Best Asian Short Stories 2018. She has contributed poetry to various anthologies and journals in Singapore, Asia, Croatia, and the USA. She has co-edited Get Lucky, an anthology of Philippine and Singapore writings, and is the author of the novel The Rosales House, released by Penguin this month. Welcome, Migs Bravo Dutt.
Thank you so much, Aileen. Thanks everyone for having me here. It's my pleasure to read an excerpt from my novel. So this is actually my first reading for The Rosales House. So thank you for having me. So I'm going to read an excerpt from chapter 5. So here goes. Claire tried to imagine herself in Melanie's shoes. But however hard she tried, she could not see herself forsaking her own child out of filial duty. Out of curiosity, how did you manage to hide your pregnancy from other people, especially during the last trimester? Claire asked. My close friends were as naive as I was. They did not notice the changes in my body at the time. I wasn't showing until the 6th month. And when I started to show, I told my friends it was a side effect of a steroidal medicine I had been taking. Then I simply hid from everyone in my last trimester. It was more manageable then. Remember, this was before internet and mobile phones, Melanie said. But what about your parents? Claire asked. I told them I was doing an internship at a provincial hospital, so I could not spend the school break back home. My parents didn't ask too many questions. It was easier to lie to them than to my friends. Melanie said the last sentence in a much sadder tone. How did you give birth? I'm sorry to ask you all these questions, but nobody bothered to give me the details of how I came into this world, said Claire, reminding herself to pretend she was interviewing a random person on the street, not someone who had carried her in her womb for 9 months. Your grandmother took me to Laguna. She rented a room near San Pedro, and she paid the landlord's wife to look after me. She knew a doctor who owned a small hospital nearby. Your adoptive parents were called over immediately after I had given birth. It was Dina's kindness that made me agree to the adoption, Melanie said. In all this, that's one thing I'm truly grateful for. Having Daddy for a father, Claire said. Someone from City Hall came immediately and asked Dino and Anna to sign the papers and file your birth certificate. So technically, you are not legally adopted. As from birth, Dino and Anna were registered as your parents, said Melanie, her voice quivering. That's why it never occurred to me that I was adopted. My birth certificate has them as my parents. I've always thought of them as my parents. And perhaps it was indeed for the best. Claire tried to keep a lid on her thoughts, but could not hold this one. Your grandmother promised to help me finish college, but only if I signed a document relinquishing any claim on you, and not to be anywhere near you. It read like a permanent restraining order, actually. She asked me to sign it while I was still dazed from the anesthesia. Claire wanted to ask if Melanie had ever held her in her arms or looked at her before she handed her to Dino and Anna. She wanted to ask if Melanie had even checked whether she had 10 fingers and 10 toes. She wanted to know whether baby Claire had cried loudly or had merely whimpered. But all that was immaterial now. It would not change the past. Claire bit her lip as she waited for Melanie to continue. I did my graduate studies and applied for a research grant that brought me here. Then I found a job that kept me here. Melanie was now looking drained. She ordered a second cup of coffee and suggested that they meet again the next day so that she could take Claire to the Museum of Modern Art. Claire saw Melanie off to the hotel exit by the Madison Avenue side. They hugged each other under the hotel signage, but Claire was conscious not to keep it too tight or too long, such that to a casual observer, it looked as though they were mere acquaintances who had bumped into each other. A scene that was not unusual in this bustling city. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Migs. Thank you for taking us from France to the Philippines. Thank you. Our next reader is Joan Gelfand, author of the adventure fiction Extreme and tonight's radiant birthday celebrant. Joan's reviews, stories, and poetry have appeared in over 100 national and international literary journals and magazines, including Rattle, Prairie Schooner, California Quarterly, and others. Joan has been a featured reader at numerous venues in the United States and Mexico, including Bowery Poetry Club, the Southern Festival of Books, the Public Library of New York, and Litquake. Development Chair of the Women's National Book Association, a member of the National Book Critics Circle, and a juror for the Northern California Book Awards. Joan blogs for the Huffington Post and coaches writers. She lives in San Francisco with her husband, Adam Hertz, and two beatnik kitties, Jack Kerouac and Lawrence Ferlinghetti. Welcome, Joan. We're honored that you chose to spend your birthday with us tonight. Joan, can you?
Yeah, sorry about that, sorry. I said, thank you very much for having me. And I'm excited to be here because I love libraries. I grew up in libraries. My mother took me by the hand to the library and I devoured all the books. So I'm a library girl. My book Extreme, which I guess I'll hold up here, was published by Blue Light Press in July. It's a San Francisco independent small press. It takes place in a Silicon Valley gaming startup. The company is founded by two scrappy world championship skateboarders, Jeff Price and Julie Tang. The game quickly takes off when extreme sports enthusiasts join on as participants. And the game is a game of challenges and dares. So for example, a challenge is put out on Twitter. Ski down Mount Hood off trail wearing a green scarf and under a full moon. And players have 24 hours to record a video and send it in for voting. Things happen very quickly when Arthur McKnight, a Silicon Valley serial entrepreneur, finds them and offers to raise some VC funding for them. Well, the next thing you know, Hollywood wants to make the game into a reality show. Now they're in trouble because their site has been built on some scrappy code. And everyone knows, especially the CEO, that this will never hold up. And so he hires this another seasoned Silicon Valley executive, Hope Elson, who's kind of the star of the book. And he tells her that he's really worried that the site won't hold up. So Hope offers to hire her married ex. Sparks fly. And in this scene that I'm going to read, Hope and Doug haven't seen each other for 3 years, and Hope has a secret. And I'm going to read a piece of chapter 10, and it's when Hope and Doug are meeting, and Hope is hoping to get Doug interested to join the company to help them recode this site. Pulling open the heavy wooden door to the Central Park Bistro, Hope is greeted by the din of a pumped up lunch crowd. Iced teas are ferried on trays like the martinis of yesteryear. Waiting in the vestibule, Doug is wearing skinny jeans and a button down. When Hope calls out, "Hey, Doug's eyes light up. He hugs her, but it's not the "I'm your old boyfriend" hug. Doug hugs women, men, dogs, babies. The feel of his lean body against hers and the imperceptible scent of peppermint brings her back to his apartment in downtown Palo Alto, the one where they felt madly, excruciatingly in love. Hope examines her ex sideways. Looking good, Wiser. Very good. Be cool, Hope, she tells herself. Cool. The officious hostess, clutching menus like a nurse with medical charts, leads Doug and Hope to a booth. Hope thinks, I'll tell him. He deserves to know. He can handle it. Besides, he's a married man now. It won't mean much, right? I just want to set the record straight. I wasn't being flaky. I was scared. But when? Before I tell him about the job? No, after. After is better. Are you really leaving Manuserve after that big fat promotion? Doug plunges right in over a grilled burger with onions and cheese, no bun. Don't tell, he whispers. Katie's got me on the meatless Blue Apron plan. If I eat one more veggie burger, I'm going to keel over. Like she was going to call Katie to report on Doug's menu choices. Guilty. Yes, I am leaving after that big fat promotion. But you know me, Doug. Hope chuckles a sinister laugh. In my house, guilt is a low-grade fever. 2 Advil, I'm over it. Doug cracks a half smile. He knows the blithe Hope. Hope spanks herself for being flip, but being with Doug has got her amped up. He's asked about Manuserve the way he would ask an ex-colleague, not an ex-lover. Not the Doug who advised her on every career move, every strategic email. This is married Doug. He doesn't really care that she would leave Manuserve. She's got an opportunity and he just might want in. How bad is it? Doug asks, meeting her eyes for the first time. At Manuserve, it's all right. Hope glimpses the old Doug, the Doug who actually cares about her. Her throat tightens. I'm doing my job. It's fine. I just don't find yakking about the latest in warehouse services exactly inspirational. Hope draws air quotes around inspirational. I mean, come on, Doug. Enterprise software. Her eyebrows arch. Not our speed. Exactly. Yeah, what's the point of a good work day without those gut-wrenching nights, Doug smirks. Totally boring. Hope laughs conspiratorially. She leans in. And all that guff we caught from the gadget bloggers, what about that article when we launched? Topia, sharper image for geeks. Yeah, Carlson Wayne really banged us around on Boing Boing. That was fun. I miss those days, Hope says. Besides, Fear to Shred works some magic because the offer was everything I wanted. Salary increase, VP title, and a stock package that, if things go as Arthur claims, will be worth $2 million or more. I'm listening, Doug says. While he returns to his close encounter with the carnivorous, Hope sits across the table from the man she's thought about, grappled with, left without saying why, and taken on an imaginary roller coaster ride of her shape-shifting emotions for the past 3 years. She's not sure working with him is a good idea. Seeing him every day could fan the low-burning flame into something much bigger. Now, she's not even sure why she arranged this meeting. Thank you.
So much, Joan.
Thank you.
Our next reader is Audrey Kalman, author of Chinese Shoes, Dancing, and Other Stories, which was shortlisted for the 2019 Rubery Book Award. Audrey is the author of 2 novels and numerous short stories and currently serves as president of the San Francisco Peninsula branch of the California Writers Club. In early 2020, she was selected as one of 21 literary residents at the newly formed Shuffle Collective. Welcome, Audrey Kalman.
Thank you so much. It is a delight to be here with these other readers. And yeah, I'm going to read, as you mentioned, from Tiny Shoes Dancing. It actually is newly released as an audiobook this summer. So for those of you who enjoy listening to your books rather than reading them, you can check that out. And I'm just going to read the first few pages of a story called Skyping with the Rabbi. Jake's dad drove him to Rabbi Miriam's house every Sunday through the summer and fall. The rabbi's house was 25 miles from where Jake and his parents lived, but his father seemed to look forward to these excursions, despite giving up sleeping late on Sunday mornings. Jake's mother would already be sitting at the kitchen table with a third cup of coffee and a stack of work. She would look up and smile with what Jake thought of as her real life face, unmade up, the planes of her cheeks settling toward her mouth, the border of her lips indistinct without the usual slash of lipstick, her blue eyes floating in the naked rims of her lids. Jake wasn't so young or so oblivious that he didn't notice how fast her smile faded when she turned to his father. "Feel like coming with us?" Jake's father would ask, as he always did. His mother would shake her head and purse her lips around her coffee cup. Jake's father would shrug, swipe his keys from the counter, and squeeze Jake's shoulder in a way that made him shiver. "Okay, your loss," his father would say, and they'd head out to the car. Jake had just been allowed to start sitting in the front seat, having achieved the milestone of 5 feet and 100 pounds a few months after turning 12. The rides to the rabbi's house gave him an opportunity to study his father's face. He noted the similarities to his own face and, oddly, to his mother's, gravity having exerted on both parents the same downward tug of the flesh. His father didn't shave on Sundays, and Jake thought the stubble of his beard gave him a sketchy look that was kind of cool. His father had talked a lot the first few times they rode together to the rabbi's house. This was the most time they'd spent together since Jake was a toddler. At home, their separate interests absorbed them. Jake's father down in his basement woodworking shop, Jake nominally in his room, but really off somewhere in far lands, sucked through the glowing portal of his computer screen. "This is nice, isn't it?" Jake's father had said the first ride. "Gives us a chance to spend time together." The talking had petered out by the third trip, replaced by talk radio. His father seemed addicted to this kind of chatter, the host going on and on about some current event, railing against his conservative counterparts. Jake listened for a while, and then let the radio voice become background music as he watched the office parks flash by along the interstate. Rabbi Miriam headed no flock, no temple contained her free spirit. She taught private classes from her little house at the edge of town. A jungle of ferns grew on either side of the path from the street, as tall as Jake and reaching their creepy fronds down to tickle his neck when he wasn't looking. Inside, the house smelled of cat boxes and macaw and the gamey stench of a white rat. Rabbi Miriam kept as many animals as Noah. Jake's mother didn't want him to be there. She had grown up secular, had never gone to temple, never observed a Jewish holiday, could never answer Jake's questions about how to pronounce a Hebrew word. But his dad had gone through it all, and with the sadistic delight of a surgeon or army general, wanted to inflict on his son the same rituals he'd had to endure. The Rabbi Miriam situation irritated Jake. The work wasn't a problem. Jake spent less time studying than boys who took their instruction the traditional way from the rabbi at the temple. It was irritating because it was part of his parents' unconventional lifestyle, which they foisted upon Jake. For example, the ceremony and reception couldn't be at the temple because his parents didn't, they said, buy into the whole organized religion thing. Why bother with a bar mitzvah in the first place if they didn't buy into it? And if the ceremony was going to be at some weird little restaurant that specialized in stuffed grape leaves, then where would the band set up? Would his parents even hire a band? And if they didn't hire a band, how would he ever have an excuse to put his hand on Helen Dobson's back and get close enough to smell her herbal essences shampoo? Rabbi Miriam's rat was named Suki. At first, Jake didn't go anywhere near it. But one Sunday morning, the rabbi greeted Jake and said, "Why don't you go over your Torah portion? I have to talk to Leah for a few minutes." Then she disappeared with her cell phone into the bedroom to talk to her daughter. Jake had been over his Torah portion the night before at his father's insistence and was still upset with his father for the timing of the demand. The request had forced him away from his computer in the middle of a particularly delicate Farlands quest, during which Largehead 2 and Gimme Candy had been counting on Jake's superior health to withstand damage from the new attack force. Now, in defiance of the rabbi, and in some vague way of his father, Jake sat on the couch and left his notebook closed beside him. Suki's cage occupied an end table next to the couch, where any ordinary person would have placed a table lamp and maybe a book of photographs of the Appalachian Mountains. The rat had never shown any interest in him, but now it came to the side of the cage nearest Jake and poked its small pink nose through the mesh. The nose looked almost like a cat's nose. Jake found himself leaning toward it. The rat fastened its eyes on Jake's. The eyes were the same weird creamy blue as the marbles Jake used to collect. Jake heard Rabbi Miriam's voice through the closed bedroom door rise high and taut, the way it did when she led him in song. He extended a finger toward Suki's nose. The rat sniffed the proffered finger and then retreated to the tiny cushion at the other side of the cage, where it curled into a ball and closed its eyes. The first big snowstorm of the season arrived one Saturday night in mid-November. "You shouldn't go out in this mess," Jake's mother said to his father at breakfast. "You'll slide off the road." "That's why we got the Jeep," his father said. "I don't care. I'll be a wreck sitting here worrying about you." About Jake, she meant. She never seemed to worry much about Jake's father. Thus it was decided that, during the winter months, instead of visiting Rabbi Miriam's house, Jake would take his instruction over Skype. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Audrey. Our final reader is none other than Geri Spieler, a journalist and investigative reporter. Geri has written for the Los Angeles Times, San Francisco Chronicle, Forbes, and as a research director for Gartner, a global technology advising company, and currently is a regular contributor to truthdig.com, an award-winning investigative reporting website. Her nonfiction book, Taking Aim at the President, The Remarkable Story of the Woman Who Shot at Gerald Ford, published by Macmillan, has won many first-place awards and has been optioned for a movie by screenwriters Andrew Logan and Taylor Allen. Her latest book, co-authored with her husband, San Francisco Values, Common Ground for Getting America Back on Track, has received notable attention from organizations and media. Geri is a past president of the California Writers Club, member of the Society of Professional Journalists, the Internet Society, and Book Critics Circle. Please welcome Geri Spieler.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. All right, so this is, you can see the book without, there we go. Nope, never mind. It's San Francisco Values, Common Ground for Getting America Back on Track. And my husband and I wrote it because we thought that San Francisco was getting unfairly maligned by a lot of people in the right. And so we did it. We looked at San Francisco, the history and who we are and how we go forward. So I'm going to start with some introduction. More than 26 million visitors travel to San Francisco each year, 23 million from other parts of the country and 3 million from abroad. They come to explore and enjoy the vibrancy and inviting openness of this legendary California site, to see for themselves why 8 million people have chosen to make the Bay Area their home, and to see why so much of what becomes norm across the country begins in this innovative context. At the same time, conservative commentators from Bill O'Reilly to the blogger next door have tried to make San Francisco the 3 dirtiest words in politics. They issue that phrase as a shorthand for plastering an anti-American label on anyone supporting the secular progressive culture commonly associated with the San Francisco Bay Area. Hey, look, these are tax-raising, terrorist-loving, same-sex, marriage-supporting, ultra-liberal Democrats who aren't like you and me. And this is from media strategist Dan Schur. So let's talk about the evolution of San Francisco. Herb Caen said, "One day, if I do go to heaven, I'll look around and say, it ain't bad, but it ain't San Francisco." And William Saroyan said, "If you're alive, you can't afford in San Francisco. And if you're not alive, San Francisco will bring you to life." So our question is, how did San Francisco become San Francisco? And what exactly are San Francisco values? San Francisco grew rapidly during the gold rush, with immigrants from Europe, Japan, China, South America, as well as the East Coast, creating a city virtually overnight. They depended on each other to build a society in which they could live and work. It was a proverbial melting pot where their common needs outweighed any differences. An 1846 census of the 3 Bay Area communities collectively identified 290 residents from Mexico and European descent, including outposts, but not the Alone Indians. There were fewer than 400 people in the entire area. Then on January 24th, 1848, John Marshall discovered gold at Captain John Sutter's sawmill in the American Fork River. As word got out that there was gold in them there hills, San Francisco, the nearest port and cross-country terminus to the gold fields, became a boom town almost overnight. This growth was further spurred by President James Polk's December 1848 message to Congress recognizing the California gold rush. 1 year later, in 1849, gold hunters poured into San Francisco from all over the world. By the end of that 1 year, the population had reached 23,000 people. San Francisco continued to grow rapidly through the balance of the 19th century to 150,000 people, and in 1870, 150,000 people. Coming to San Francisco in 1849 was not for the weak-hearted or simple-minded. Those who made it were the hardiest, luckiest, and most determined to survive the journey. That's our legacy. Despite the difficulties of the journey, people flooded in by land and sea by the thousands. Living conditions were suboptimal. The men who came out west didn't take any time to build anything more than a living space. Few cared about anything except getting to the foothills of the Sierra Mountains and finding gold. Those not going out to plant for gold were focused on developing supply sources and services for the owners. Think Levi Strauss. Only the great gambling houses, hotels, restaurants, and a few public buildings had any pretense to size and comfort. The streets were uneven, often knee-deep in mud, and dark at night, as there were no streetlights. The rapid pace of growth had a major impact on the evolution of the city. Even more critical than the speed of growth was the unbalanced nature of the in-migrants. The hardy adventurers who came to San Francisco were, at first, almost all men without families, without the leavening influence of mothers and wives and sisters and daughters. Parental authority didn't come to tame the behavior. The gold miners were not part of the landscape. Absent families, there was no one to tell the men how to behave, or how to use the correct fork, or how to require other men to treat women who could, in other settings, be their sisters. Displays of poor table manners, mismatched shirts and pants, and a lack of a civil tongue were common to the streets and saloons. When women did begin to arrive, many of them, in turn, were also adventurous. And for many, their adventures were to provide female company and services to the men. Prostitution was flourishing in every major city, in American city in the second half of the 19th century. With the untamed and unbalanced nature of growth of the gold and then the silver, adventurers in Northern California, and the easy virtue of the environment, brothels became a major factor in the evolution of San Francisco landscape and soul. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Geri. We will now move on to our Q&A portion. My co-host, Lisa Meltzer Penn, will be moderating. Lisa herself is an author. Her short fiction and creative nonfiction has appeared in multiple publications, won awards, and been nominated for a Pushcart Prize. Her novel, The Siren Dialogues, literary fiction with a twist of magical realism, is complete and ready for publication. Lisa is founding editor of the Fault Zone Anthology, series for the California Writers Club San Francisco Peninsula Branch, where she is immediate past president, active on the board, and 2013 recipient of the Luis Bogas Award. Take it away, Lisa.
Thank you, Aileen. And thank you to all our authors for these readings. They were fabulous. Like, what a great diversity of types of books. It's like there's stories and novels and nonfiction and just really interesting things. So we have some questions that are in the chat, and so I'll start with those, and I have lots of my own. And I just wanted to remark that it seems like we have several California Writers Club presidents here in the group, which is not a complete coincidence. But so I just wanted to say, if there's any writers out there who are here tonight or watching this in the future, California Writers Club is one of the oldest clubs, writing clubs in the nation, and we welcome writers of all different kinds. You can look us up on the internet. So the first question, we have a request to hear more about Meg's book. Meg, would you like to jump in and talk about your book a little more?
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Audrey, for the question and interest. So the Rosales house is actually the story of Claire Rosales. She is a young advertising executive who's based in Singapore and hails from an influential political family in the Philippines. Upon the death of her grandmother, Claire found out a secret that essentially affects her. So she discovers that she is actually a product of a family scandal. And the story traces her journey. It's both an emotional and geographical journey in search of the truth.
Thank you. And I see a question from Aileen. How does being part of a writers club or a book club support writers in the process of publishing or writing their books? Wow, that's one probably a lot of us could answer. I'll just chime in since I'm on now. I find it enormously helpful to have a writing community along with all the resources that come with the club, and having, you know, just other writers who understand the process and can kind of support each other. It's just, the community is great. And even though we have not been able to meet in person for a lot of things, there's just been a virtual plethora of events going on, which is amazing. So I found that so helpful. Who else would like to chime in on that one? I'm sure you all could talk on that. Geri.
I would really like to talk on that. I first joined the California Writers Club when I was just thinking about writing my first book. I had no idea what I was doing. I had never planned to write books. Somehow I connected at the Jack London Writers Conference that they were still doing, and I found a community to support me and help me and guide me. I don't think I could have done it without the wonderful friends and mentors at the California Writers Club, and they saw me all the way through to the end, and I've been grateful ever since. I mean, the support we get and give each other is phenomenal. So I had to tell that story.
Carole.
I agree with Geri. I also joined the club mainly because I had a manuscript that was 900 pages, and obviously I didn't know what the heck to do with it. And so I thought maybe this would be helpful. And so I think I joined in 2008. And it was in 2009 or 10 that I happened to, one of the speakers came, and that was Brooke Warner, and she was from She Writes, now is from She Writes Press. And she has since, I will have my 5th book published through her, and it was through her guidance that I have all the books out that I do. But it was also learning how to do the editing and what kinds of editing do you need to do. You know, it was taking additional classes and guidance through the process, because writing a book is not for the faint of heart. And especially, you know, I had not planned on writing a book either. I was just interviewing families and people over in France and Italy and thinking, well, that's a great thing. Well, it ended up turning into, like you said before, Aileen, a historical novel, and then a cookbook. And now I have 3 books out that are all about the culinary travel memoir. Well, it was that same 900 pages that was divided up into all these different books, because that's what I had written, but I didn't know what to do. So it was through the California Writers Club that I was able to kind of hone it down and figure it out and get some really good guidance.
Great. Anybody else want to chime in on that question? Nope. Okay, we'll go on to the next one then.
Joan did.
Oh, Joan, sorry. Go ahead, Joan.
That's okay. Is it okay if I talk about another club?
Sure.
I'm a member of the California Writers Club, but I also was involved with the Women's National Book Association. I joined them in 2004 and became the president of the San Francisco chapter and then the president of the national organization. I met 5 of my 6 book publishers through the WNBA, through some sort of a meeting or networking, or we brought in experts, and that has just been really amazing. And I learned how to talk about my work in public. You know, writers, you know, we don't tend to be naturally self-promoting. And so I learned a lot about how to share your work and grassroots, the grassroots part, yeah. And I've been able to help other writers now that I'm moved along the line.
Lisa,
Thank you.
Lisa, this is Darlene. I can't raise my hand, but I would like to say,
hi,
answer
Darlene.
that question.
Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
I've been a member of the California Writers Club, the Peninsula branch, or actually I was in the Marin branch before that, but since the 1990s, and I just have gained more value than I could even express from being in the club. And I've also seen the nature of the club change, particularly in the last couple of years as self-publishing became more of an option. Our membership seems to be increasing. People have questions. The people who are scheduling the speakers have brought in such a variety of people to share information, practical and things that they're doing that nobody in our club probably has ever thought of doing. It's really an inspiring and a creative group, and we help each other. It's writers helping writers. That's one of our taglines. And I really feel that about the club whenever I go to a meeting. I miss the in-person meetings, of course, but somehow still we're helping each other as we gather virtually and on Facebook. So there is a lot of value to and help to someone who is, what was the question exactly? Helping them being in the process of publishing or writing their books.
Thank you, Darlene. And I just wanted to also note that I first met Joan through Women's National Book Association because I was originally involved with them as well before I moved down to the peninsula. So next question is for Carole from Joan, who's asking, are the recipes in your book the classic ones from the France of the past? And if so, do you offer substitutions? I ask because you read a piece in which some of the ingredients were not available anymore. And I know you've done a lot of testing, and I also just wanted to chime in here that I really like the piece that you read, how there was a story being told, but you got to kind of jump in and ask questions in the middle of the storytelling and get a picture of what something looked like, which was really interesting. So
Thank you.
Tell us about the recipes.
Well, as far as the recipes are concerned, I usually tried to take what they gave me. So I didn't bring in the matelote because, like she said, it's too difficult. But I did have the stew, the fish stew and fish chowders that they had mentioned. So whenever there was a mention of any kind of food at all, then sometimes that is a recipe that I would bring forward at the end of the cookbook or at the end of the book. And as far as substitutions, that's part of what I was really wanting to stress, is that I was only focusing on the peasant cooking, which is you choose foods that are local or regional, seasonal, and economical. So if you don't have things available to you, you can find substitutions. I'm not offering them. I let you figure that out. And because it becomes more of a creative process on your own part. And so, in fact, I had 19 recipes for this book tested. In fact, Lisa was one of the testers, so was Geri. And one of the things that happened, because I did this during COVID, and so people couldn't get out to get certain kinds of ingredients. And so they needed to make it up. They needed to substitute. They needed to figure out what they had in their own cupboards and do with, as most peasant cooking would be. You use what you've got. And so that was, in some ways, it became kind of a plus, because we got to experience the fact that during most all of these times, they didn't have supermarkets. They didn't have anything available in quite the same way. So they came from the lean part of and the simple part. And so that was what I was bringing forward. I have someone that's testing some of my Italian recipes right now. Sandra Savage, you would recognize Steve. Steve Higgs is doing some of my testing right now and for the Italian. And there was one recipe that calls for something that you can only buy over in Italy. So he's testing something to be a substitution. So we are finding out ways of, so what could you replace in here? So that's, I'm working on it, but I'm not going to provide a whole list of substitutions. This is not a cookbook per se. It's actually a book about the families that I visited and met. And oh, by the way, there's recipes at the end of the book. So that's it.
Thank you. And Carole, part 2 of that question is, how did you get French cooks to share their recipes so freely with an American? Because wouldn't some of them be considered family secrets?
Well, like I mentioned, I was with Josiane, and Josiane was someone I traveled with. She's French. She was a friend of mine, and it was actually her mother, Marcel and Josiane, that really led me into this in the first place, because they were going to teach me how to do French cooking. And so Josiane took me with her to France, and we traveled to all their family members' homes throughout all the different regions in France, and also to some of her friends. In fact, Micheline is one of the friends that had been a longtime friend when she was a little girl. And so that was how I got into the homes. It was with a good friend that brought me in and told the people, I'm here for the sole purpose of learning about your culture, your traditions, your foods, and some of your stories, family stories. And that was why I was there.
Excellent. Well, you got some great stories there.
Thank
So
you.
that was really lucky, and you also don't speak French, do you?
I
You don't
do
speak
not.
a lot of French.
I do not.
So
I was very
was quite
dependent on Josiane and dependent on the tape recorder to pull all this together, because then she had to transcribe it after I got home.
Okay, because that was another question, was how
Yeah.
did you take notes? It was mostly on tape recorder then?
Yeah, I did. And I did take notes. I did both.
Great. Thank you for sharing all that. And we just have some comments that people love the readings, and let's see. I have people feel free to add more questions to the chat. I actually have several questions myself, so I'm going to jump in. Let's see. Oh, okay. So Megs, you have the distinction of having the newest book, I think, of this whole bunch. Your book just came out this month, and you said this was your first reading. So how did it feel?
Well, I think this group is very welcoming. So thank you for making me comfortable about sharing this chapter. It's actually a very emotional chapter because it's where, Claire meets her biological mother for the first time. So my best friend actually suggested this. So I was glad actually that my best friend, who claims not to be fond of reading, finally read the book and then highlighted this to me as the high emotional point of the novel. So that's why I shared it here. So thank you for having me, really. So I'm used to reading poetry because I've written more poetry, and back in Singapore, I mean, I guess it makes Singapore different in the sense that the poetry community is quite active. So yes, very active. So this is, I think, probably not a very, it's not very often that I read from prose.
Lisa, you're muted.
Sorry, I want to jump in with a question for Joan because she has to leave in a couple of minutes. She has a surprise visitor. You're still here, Joan, right?
I am.
Okay, good. So I have a couple of questions for you. One was, I'm dying to know if you do any extreme sports. That's what your book is about.
Everyone asked me that because there's a base jumping scene in the book. No, the most extreme that I do is snorkeling, jumping off the side of a boat, swimming in the ocean, but, skiing, but nothing crazy. Nope. I had to put my imagination. Yeah.
My other question is, you're very prolific. You have pieces in over 100 literary journals. So I'm curious, how did you do that? And how did you find them all? And what are they all different pieces, or did you have some that were published more than once? It was quite impressive.
I think that my first 3 books are poetry. So I've had a lot of poems published. Then I also write reviews because I'm a member of the National Book Critics Circle. So, it's not all the same kind of work. I have short stories published. So articles, reviews, poetry, short stories. So it's quite a mix. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And do you get rejections too, or do you, because you're more known name, do you get like, oh, it's from Joan, we'll
here not gotten a reject? Oh my God. Yeah.
But does it help that you have all these publications when people look at your work?
For those, actually now it's closer to about 150 publications, but I mean, there must be 500 rejections.
Yeah.
And it's,
well, those are pretty good odds if you get a nice balance.
Oh yeah, it's most normal people would have given up.
Let's see. Is there anything else you want to say about your book before you have to leave us?
I wanted
because yours is really new too.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I just wanted to make sure that people were aware that the book really features women in Silicon Valley with both the excitement, but also the challenges. Nothing super rough. There's no abuse or anything like that, but it's just, the subtle problems that they face, and it's couched within a fiction setting. But, my protagonist is from, quote unquote, the wrong side of the tracks. You know, she grew up in Livermore, but she's made this shift and become very successful in Silicon Valley. So I wanted to say a lot about sociology, class, women's education, how important it is. And, you know, so there's a lot of that as kind of subplots besides the love story. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to reading it.
Thank you. Lisa. Thank you.
And it was nice to be with you tonight, and stay as long as you like. I'll move on to the next questions, but I know you can just go whenever you need to, and we will continue the conversation. Audrey Kalman. Audrey, I've known you for quite a while. We've done a lot of work together, and you are always trying out something different. You have poems and stories and novels and all different kinds of novels. You've published self-publishing, independent publishing. You're looking for an agent now for another book. So I just wanted to ask you, how do you balance it all and figure out what is what?
Well, that's a small question. Thank you. Well, maybe I'll just talk a little bit about the question of like the kinds of things that I write. I mean, I think until about 10 years ago, if you said, you know, what kind of fiction do you write? What kind of writing do you do? I write literary fiction. And I still think that's kind of deep down, that's true. Mostly because for myself, I define that as fiction that's driven by character rather than by plot, has an extra other dimensions to it, something philosophical. But I really have kind of branched out in the last few years, and I think it's just the stories that call to me. You know, something will spark my imagination, and I also think, like, you know, the thing that I'm working on right now is may turn out to be a genre that I've never written in before, and part of it is just to keep myself excited about my work, because it's you know, you can get sort of tracked into doing the same thing. I mean, I know people do that. I know there are like prolific writers that have, you know, 50 mysteries that they've written, and they just keep writing mysteries. And but I feel like once I've mastered something, or you know, some particular style or genre, it's like, okay, you know, I kind of am familiar with that. Now let's move on to the next challenge. So yeah, I think it's more about what excites me and interests me, that puts me into whatever the next project's going to be.
Thank you. And I have a specific question about your book, Tiny Shoes Dancing, too. I'm wondering what the organizing principle was when you put them together. And then also, since it's now an audiobook, what did you find when you were recording the stories aloud that was different from when they were in print? Did you find that you had a different feeling about them, or you wanted to change things or put them together in a different way?
Yeah, so, well, to be honest, the organizing principle, well, the fact that they are all together in a book is I finally had enough stories to make a book. So it's like, okay, I have enough stories, I'll make a book. And I probably spent less time on the order of them than you would have, because Lisa and I, a little admission here, we worked together on several editions of the Fault Zone anthology. And if you ever need someone to order your book of stories, Lisa is your woman. She has a real knack for it. And to me, I don't know, I didn't think about it that much in terms of the order of the stories. And as far as recording it, I did take a little leap. I mean, a lot of people hire, you know, professional readers. I happen to love to read, and that combined with the potential expense of hiring someone else sort of convinced me to try it myself, doing my own reading, which I did, and I hope it came out. I've gotten a couple of reviews, and one of the reviews of the audiobook actually said that the person appreciated the narration, so that made me feel good. But it was interesting because I did find upon reading, even though I had read the stories, that's part of my editing process of my stories is to read them aloud, but I'm not recording them, so it's a little different. When I recorded them, I did find a few sentences here and there that were just practically impossible to say without stumbling over my tongue. And so I did a little tiny bit of editing, and if you're really interested, you can read the story and listen along and figure out what I left out and what I changed. And then, yes, there were a couple things where I said, oh, I wish I hadn't written that quite that way. And again, some of them I made a little change in the audio version, and some of them I just let slide and said, oh, well, that's in the past.
Thank you. And speaking of audio versions of story, I should mention that this event is being hosted by the San Mateo County Libraries, and they have recently begun a story cafe, a virtual story cafe, which is in their Between the Lines section on their homepage of their website, and you can find some of our stories there, video recordings of them, and they're a lot of fun. There's a new one featured every week. So Audrey's in there, I'm in there, hopefully Carole will be soon, and they're a lot of fun, so check that out as well. Okay, does anybody want to talk about publishing during the pandemic or writing during the pandemic, as we've all been dealing with? Carole.
Well, I had one book that came out just a year ago in August, and then again this August. And then my next book is coming out in April. One of the things that happened is that I realized, isn't this wonderful? And oh my God, this is a frenetic pace. I had no idea that you needed to have at least a year and a half to 2 years in between each book, because there is so much that you need to be doing all the time to prepare for it and get it ready, get the ARCs or the advanced reader copies up. In fact, my advanced reader copies are supposed to be up and ready to go out probably in another month. And it's not supposed to come out till April. And I just finished this other one, just started promoting this other one. And so it's a good thing, and it's a difficult thing, because during the pandemic, all you can do is Zoom. And so that's been good, and it's been a real interesting way to do it. There's no way of going into the bookstores anymore and promoting in that same way. And in some ways, I kind of like this better. I don't have to serve champagne every time like I did before, and or cook any kind of French food to take with me. And you get to think about it while I'm reading about it, but you don't get to taste it. But I think there are a lot of different changes that have taken place, and I think some of them are really positive. And yes, I hope that when the next book comes out, that the pandemic is over in April, but there's no guarantee. And I think one of the things about writing during the pandemic, it's given me more of an opportunity to really focus on things and get it done. And thank God, because I don't know that I would have been able to do this if we hadn't been shut down in this way. So so there's good and bad to this whole process. And I guess when I first started, once you write a book, one of the things that is you almost need another graduate degree in, and that's in promotion. And my gosh, there's so much to learn, and especially when you're promoting during pandemic, nobody's there, so how do you go about doing it? So there's lots of things to learn, and it's a moving target.
Thank you. And Aileen, I know you have been very busy during the pandemic, because you conceived of this Peninsula Book Festival, which was not originally going to be virtual, but then it became virtual. So I wanted to thank you for really putting all these events together, and you've been so wonderful about contacting authors to include them. And I mean, we just had a quick conversation. This whole thing was put together, and it was just one of many events. So I'm just realizing that so many people are really generous by nature. I've approached authors, and they didn't even think twice about it. They said yes. And so this is a way to honor
the authors who do so much for their communities. This also has been a great way to connect with authors and readers from Cemetery County and beyond. We also were able to feature an author based in London, an author based in India. So and we hope to keep the connection even after the pandemic. So it's a great way to learn about other cultures.
Excellent. Anyone else have anything to say on that topic? Publishing and writing during the pandemic? It's been definitely a balancing act. It's like we have to be at our desks writing, but it's hard to be forced to stay inside all the time. And I know that Carole, doing the recipes for your book, testing those recipes was one of the very first things I did when this whole thing started, because the timing just happened. I was like, oh, I'm going to need something to do. I can test a couple of recipes.
Lisa, by the way,
thank you. That was fun. Thank you very much for participating in that.
Welcome. Aileen, what were you saying?
I was just gonna, I posted links on where to get a copy of the books, and also
oh, good. That's in the chat.
It's on the chat, and also on social media, Facebook and Instagram. And also thanks to Migs, we are, Singapore is hopefully watching. So it's
great. Excellent.
I was actually supposed to travel to Singapore for the launch, but obviously I couldn't anymore. But what I also realized during this pandemic is that people come together. It's like I was really surprised by the amount of support I am getting from people all over the place. So it's not just in Singapore. So all of a sudden, my classmate from the UK, whom I haven't seen for decades, sent me a photo saying that, oh, I've downloaded the book. So, you know, it somehow helps to reconnect with old friends and classmates on the personal level. So I think more and more, I guess for authors, it helps to have a stronger word of mouth in the absence of bigger media to promote the book. So that's, I think, my realization.
I'm wondering what all of you authors have in the works. Now that you have books out, what's next? And then we just have a little bit more time and we will tie it up, but I'm just curious what everyone's working on. Who would like to jump in? Migs.
Yeah, I've actually started my second book. So it's about roommates. So it's actually a collection of novellas, 4 novellas, in a way connected by the room that they shared during university. So I'm hoping that, you know, somebody will pick it up in the next year or so, and hoping that it will be published, sometime next year or 2 years from now. So I guess in the beginning of the pandemic, writing that helped me to be sane, because it's like, I didn't really know what's going to happen. And at that time, I was still hopeful, like, it's gonna be over in 3 months. So I tried to focus on my writing during that time. But after that, it's like, now it's getting more and more difficult to write.
Yeah, once we hit that 6-month mark, something like happened to me. I'm like, oh, it's like I want it to be over with already. And that was just last week. Carole, I know you're working on book 3 of your travel food series, correct? Travel food memoirs.
Right.
What actual category did you make up that category? Travel.
I'm sorry? How do I make that
your
up?
category? Yeah, is it travel food memoir?
Yeah, it's a culinary travel memoir.
And that's a category that existed?
I mean,
made it up?
That's what it ended up being, and that's where it's put in libraries. And what that means is that you can find it in anywhere. You know, it could be in memoirs, it could be in travel, it could be in cookbooks. And so Barnes & Noble put it into the cookbook section with all of the other authors that write, stories and essays along with it. So that's fine, but we don't even find that now because we can't go in there much, in the same way. As far as the thing that's been kind of funny for me is that I had all of these books somewhat written probably almost 20 years ago. And so now I'm faced with the first time of writing something brand new instead of editing. And it's kind of exciting and also a little frightening. So it's, so I'm looking at that. So what's coming after that, I'm not sure. I had a contract for these 3 books, and the 3rd one is already written and will be coming out in April. And then after that, I haven't committed to anything, and yet. But it's
well, I hear there's a Fault Zone anthology deadline coming up, Carole. You haven't submitted to one of those in a while. There are some very funny stories in the early versions of it.
Yes, I did. In fact, you'll find one of those is the beginning of this Italian book. Yep. The Loss of Underwear.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. Yes, I do remember that one.
So
that is
anyway, on that high note.
Audrey, do you have anything to add? I know what you're working on, but do you want to tell the rest of the people here?
Yeah, I mean, I did allude to this. It's a little early in the book process for me to say much about it, but it is different from what I've done before. And I'm also, as Lisa alluded to, I am looking for an agent for the first time for a novel that's I completed a couple of years ago. And then I have another one after that that's done that I don't know what I'm going to do with. And I also have a bunch of short stories. I participated last year in NaNoWriMo, which for those of you who don't know what that is, it's National Novel Writing Month every November. And it's basically writers will commit to usually writing 50,000 words of a novel. Except I didn't have a novel idea last year, so I wrote 50,000 words, but it was 10 short stories. So I have drafts of a bunch of short stories. One of them I actually finished and was published, but the other 9 are waiting for me to get back to them. So I'm hoping interspersed with my new novel, I'll be able to get back to some of the short story writing, which I really do enjoy for one, because it's just gets finished much faster. And I like having something done as opposed to going on for years and years on the same project.
Yeah.
I know what you mean. Yeah, I have my novel I've been sending out and looking for an agent. I know Audrey is also looking at the moment because we have agent hour we were doing once a week. And I have a memoir I'm going back to, and I'm stealing Audrey's idea for this year's NaNoWriMo, and I'm going to do write stories for the month of November because I want to be able to finish things and be able to send them out. So I'm looking forward to that. So we are just about out of time. So I wanted to thank everyone for being here, including Joan and Geri, who had to jump off the call a little early. But this was fascinating hearing all of your works. I can't wait to read more. Thank you to Aileen for putting all this together. Thank you to the San Mateo County Libraries for promoting us. And we'll be in the Between the Lines section of their website. And you can check that out any time. So that's the great thing about doing it this way is there is a recording that will keep going on past tonight. And let's see, is there anything else? Thank you to everyone who attended and is watching and is going to read these books. So with that, we will close for the evening. Thank you so much.
To everyone, good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Good night, everyone.
Welcome. Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you all.
Happy writing, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Have a nice night.
Night.
Night.